So thank you very much for the introduction. This is going to be a little bit different and maybe somewhat the same as the last presentation here. We're going to look at things from the business side, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about disruptive innovation today. So I might walk around a little bit, might ask a few questions, so we'll see how this goes. So, these are exciting companies that we hear a lot about, Facebook and Amazon and Google. But if we think just, a couple decades back, these were the exciting companies that we heard a lot about. Digital equipment and Sears and Xerox. And if you look across a broad swath of business history, what you find is in diverse industries from steel to computers to retail, the firms that were once leading the industry, you look a decade later, they're sort of in the middle of the pack and some even at the bottom. And the interesting thing is, these were companies that were widely lauded by the business press, by analysts, and yet they missed something important that precipitated their downfall. And so it's sort of tempting to jump to these ready-made explanations here. This thing about, maybe it's managerial incompetence that's driving this. Maybe it's things like technological complexity. They can't get their handle around the technology. But remember, these are smart people. These are smart managers. They're not doctors, but they're smart people. And they're being very thoughtful about these things. And as we tried to study this puzzle, what is it that leads leading firms to fail, we came to sort of a counterintuitive idea here. That maybe it's actually good management that's the root cause of the problem. So when I say good management, I mean the very things that we teach them at Harvard Business School and places like that actually causes executives to take their once successful companies and take them off a cliff, okay? And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that today in the context of how industries change, how innovations emerge, and how companies can take advantage of this, okay? So I'm going to start with the steel industry. So since many of you probably have not made a lot of steel yet in your lives, I think this will be a good way to look at how management in successful firms are using good management principles that we would teach on an everyday basis and lead their firms into the ground, okay? So historically, there's two ways to make steel. One is what we call the integrated steel companies. This is companies like Bethlehem and US Steel. It costs about $10 billion to build a new integrated steel mill in today's dollars. Now, on the other hand, you have, on the bottom right, you have mini mills. And mini mills take scrap and they melt it in an electric arc furnace and they produce steel on the other end. Now, the important point for this presentation is that this is a technology that allows you to produce steel for 20% lower cost than you can in the integrated case. Okay? Now, put yourself in the shoes of a CEO of an integrated steel company. Okay? You're producing a commodity product. You have a new technology that emerges that allows you to produce that commodity product for 20% lower costs. Wouldn't you adopt it? It's broadly available. It allows you to produce your product at a lower cost, and yet not a single integrated steel mill ever adopted the mini mill technology. And why is it that something that seems so sensible is actually impossible for smart people to do? Okay? So I want to look at this a little bit more closely. So steel, like many other industries, is comprised of tiers. So at the bottom end, you have concrete reinforcing bar or rebar. And at the top, this is sort of simple. Any of us could sort of make that. At the top, you have sheet steel, which is used for things like appliances and cars and so forth. And that's much more complicated, much more difficult to make, and requires much more high-quality steel. And so at the time this mini mill technology emerged, you had the integrated steel companies who were producing products across all these tiers of the market. Okay? And then sort of the mini mills come in, and they start producing steel, but they don't produce very good steel. It's actually really low-quality steel. This is a new technology. And so the only people that will buy it is the bottom tier of the market, is the people that are making rebar. Okay? So the mini mills start producing steel, and they're producing it for the rebar market. And what happens is the integrated steel mills actually say, hey, you can have that part of the market. Why would we defend? We're in a commodity business. This is super competitive. We're making 7% margins in the rebar market. Why would we ever want to defend a part of the market where we're making 7% margins when we're making 12% margins in this next tier of the market, in the angle iron and bars and rods market? Okay? And so an interesting thing happened. The integrated steel mills got out of the lowest profitable part of their product portfolio, and their profitability improved. Now, the mini mills, who had much lower costs, they could produce the steel at 20% lower costs, were really excited. They were making lots of money, and everybody was sort of happy, and things were great. That is until 1979. And 1979 is the year the mini mills actually succeeded in pushing out the last integrated steel mill out of the rebar market. And as you can imagine what happens here, the price collapses by 20%, okay? And it turns out there's this interesting thing about strategy that it only works to be a low-cost player in the market, to pursue a low-cost strategy, if you have a high-cost competitor in the market, okay? And so once you sort of kick those people out, now competition takes over, and it drives the prices down, and we're no longer happy, and we can't make any money, okay? But, the mini mills, they said, hey, if we just look up market a little bit, they're getting 12% margins in the angle iron and rod market. If we can just produce a little bit better steel, we can sort of get into this market and make some money again. And so that's what they do. They stretch themselves, they bettered their processes, they developed new capabilities, and they were able to move into this angle iron bar and rod market. And as they attacked that part of the market, the integrated steel mills, again, said, hey, we're going to go ahead and give you that part of the market, because why would we ever want to defend a part of the market? We're in a commodity business. This is super competitive. Why would we ever want to defend a part of the market where we're getting 12% margins when we have this next tier up here where we're making 18% in the structural steel market? And so an interesting thing happened. Again, they cut off the lowest profitability part of their product portfolio, and their entire profit increased. And the mini mills, again, were great. They were making lots of money with their 20% cost reduction technology, and everybody was happy, okay? And that is until 1984, okay? In 1984, that's when the mini mill succeeded in kicking out the very last integrated steel mill out of the angle iron bar and rod market, and prices collapsed by 20%, okay? Now we can't make any money, but we look up market, right? And we see structural steel. And they're making 18% margins in structural steel. And so the mini mills, again, stretched their capabilities and moved up market and went after the structural steel. And again, the integrated steel mills gave away that part of the market, said, why would we ever want to defend an 18% margin part of the market when we're making 25 to 30% in sheet steel? And so everybody was happy again until 1996. And that's when the last integrated steel mill was pushed out of the structural steel portion of the steel market, and prices collapsed by 20%. You seeing a pattern here? Have I told this story before? So this is, now you're Nucor, you're one of the largest mini mills, okay? And now you've got to figure out a way to make sheet steel in a mini mill context, okay? And, so here we are today. We have, the steel industry in the US, about 60 to 65% of it is produced by mini mills now, and all but one of the integrated steel mills has gone bankrupt, okay? So I've been able to tell this entire story without using the words stupid manager once, okay? And it's because there's no stupidity involved. Every time the integrated steel mills pulled out of a tier of the market, their profitability improved. And every time the mini mills got into a new market, their profitability improved. And it's the pursuit of profit that caused these things to happen, and we call this the process of disruptive innovation, okay? So maybe I'll just pause for a minute and ask you to think about other examples, maybe in an industry maybe in your own industry, in which you had a low-tier player come in at the bottom of a market and sort of wash it all out, push all the other firms out of the market. Can anybody think of an example? Yeah, go ahead. Aha, okay. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that.
In 1994, the surgeons had their head in the sand. They are all these little guys, they won't be able to do anything.
Sorry, but I can tell this is going to be good. This is worth it.
So the story started in the early 80s with the advent of stenting. And then the surgeons always, because it was actually very unphysiologic, pictures we saw was they would blow up the balloon and then rupture the artery and the intima, and we'd say, this will never last. Well, next time they get the stent, which used to block 30% of the time, then they came up with the next toe. So we always missed the early stage. Till 94, we had our head in the sand. And actually in 94, we woke up, and what you're seeing here today is the thought process which started in 1994, 93, 94 in Paris when we founded ISMIX. So this society was formed when the awakening took place between surgeons. Then there are, I think, 11, 12 of us who first actually got together and thought about it. And what you're seeing now, what, 20 years later? Exactly 20 years later, that we actually have done a lot to actually meet the challenge. So we always were one step behind the cardiologists. Yeah. So and then about a few years ago, there was panic that surgeons are going to be fossilized. And that's when this whole reaction took place of us getting into minimal invasive stuff more and more. Although we started doing minimal invasive from 94, 95 onwards. And what you see here, and some of the original guys are here who actually contributed huge amount. The advent of the robotics, the minimal invasive accesses. So I think this is actually where, while you were talking about it, it lays out our history of the last 20 years.
Good, thank you. I'm glad the steel example was helpful. I was hoping somebody would bring up an example like that, so thank you very much.
Excuse me, another great example is pacemakers. So pacemakers were first designed at the University of Minnesota when they did some congenital heart surgery, and the newborns had a heart block, and then they invented an electronic pacemaker, actually a guy who fixed the biomedical engineering who went on biomedical engineer. And then they got the concept of one night the power went out at the university and 2 kids died who were hooked up to the power. And they got the idea from a metronome to make an electronic pacemaker, and then surgeons got bored with pacemakers, right? Because it's low-lying and we're too busy doing coronary artery surgery. And the entire EP market, we basically let go. And now it's a massive market.
Thank you.
Another example, like in Manhattan, you know, all the car rental companies are gone. We have the Uber and the Zipcar. That's a fascinating example. Yeah. And I think this is going to be evolving and exploding. Something else is going to come.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm going to get to an example like that a little bit later, if you'll hang on to that one. So, you know, as we've been studying this for the last 10 or 20 years, we've looked at a variety of different industries, not just steel, but a variety of different industries, some of the ones that you're talking about here, and inducted a model of how these things happen. And this model has a couple of principles that I want to go over with you. The first is that, you know, in any given market, the pace of technological progress often outstrips market's demand for higher performing technologies. And as a result, firms can sort of overserve the market in terms of producing ever, you know, feature-rich products that the average consumer doesn't need, right? And so you have this gap between what's being produced by firms and what the average consumer needs, and you sort of leave a spot at the low end or in a new market for some of these other firms to come in. Okay? And so this is a razor that you might have seen. This is the Gillette Infinitum Ad Nauseum with 22 blades, right? So they're adding more and more blades. We're sort of overshooting the market here, right? The second principle is that there's a strategically important distinction between different types of innovations, be it technological innovations or be they business model innovations that emerge and grow in a market. And the first type we call sustaining innovations. These are things that improve the products and services along dimensions of performance that are sort of historically important that mainstream customers value, right? This is about making the things that you already do better, right? Adding the 5th blade to your razor, making the picture on your television set ever more clear, giving you better cell phone reception. And it allows you to sell your existing products to your existing customers for more money, okay? And we contrast that with disruptive innovations, which are initially inferior on the historic performance dimensions, on the ones that mainstream customers value. But what's tricky about them is that over time they get better, and as they get better, they sometimes invade the market. And what's interesting too is they often take hold in an area of the market that's sort of seen as a fringe group of customers, right? Because they're somewhat different than the mainstream customers. And so in this case, you have, you know, the mini mill technology that the only people who are going to buy it is the low-end folks in the rebar market, right? But as it gets better and better, it comes up and invades the market. So the third principle here is that existing customers and established profit models actually constrain a firm's investments and innovations. So something that looks unattractive to me as a large incumbent firm because I have lots of resources and I need good return on investment looks very, very attractive to a new startup or an entrant because I don't have any customers and I don't have any resources. And so every investment looks attractive to me. And so incumbents in this case are typically not motivated to pursue disruptive innovations because why would they? They promise smaller markets, they're things that our existing customers aren't interested in, and they're lower margins, right? And so we're not gonna, and we're motivated, so this is why you see the steel companies fleeing rather than fighting to defend their low market share, or their low margin products here. And so this is the sort of model here. So in any given market, you have a performance that customers can utilize or absorb. The example that I like to think about is, you have microprocessor speed on your computer. Depending on what you're doing on that computer, you might need faster or slower speed. But the idea is that it's getting better and better over time. And as incumbent firms follow the pace of technological progress, they're producing ever better products. They're producing faster microprocessors, for example. And in this case, in these sustaining innovation cases, incumbents almost always win. So they're selling their existing products to their existing customers for more money as they get better and better. But then you have these disruptive innovations that, again, they're initially inferior, present a mix of product attributes that are attractive to a subset or a fringe group of the market, but they get better and better over time, and they sort of invade in terms of what's good enough for the average customer. And in this case, entrants nearly always win. Okay? So let me give you maybe an example that's a little bit more close to home than the steel example. This is one that will probably resonate with you, the video rental industry. Okay, so the video rental industry, it's sort of fragmented. You've got mom and pop video rental stores, and the leading player here is Blockbuster. And the unique insight that Blockbuster has is, we can gratify the impulse buy, the people who are trying to rent movies for movie night, a new release on movie night. And they like to say that 70% of the US population lives within a 10-minute drive of a Blockbuster location. And they were experiencing dramatic growth and record profits in 2002, which coincidentally was also the year that Netflix went public. Okay. Now Netflix launched their home delivery business of DVDs through the mail using the US Postal Service. They had sort of a bare bones website. They had a queue. They had a search engine. And what's interesting here is that it took 3 to 5 days to get your movie. So if you think about that, that's not really attractive to Blockbuster's mainstream customer who wants their movie right then, right now. But there's a fringe group of customers who were happy with this. And the fringe group were people who were early adopters of DVD players that didn't have any DVDs to play on their DVD players originally. They were people who were geographically isolated, so didn't live within this 70% of people who were close by a Blockbuster. They were people who had maybe more eclectic tastes in movies, so liked foreign films or liked sort of more eclectic films, and they were sort of okay with this. But now, Netflix, after honing their operations over time, they get to be better and better, and they get to the point where 90% of their subscribers can now get their movie within a day. Now, all of a sudden, you have a little bit more of an interesting value proposition relative to Blockbuster. You now offer convenience, you offer value, you offer selection. And you have some differences in business model here, okay? So Blockbuster's got 5,000 stores, so think about the costs or the leases associated with this, versus Netflix has no stores. Blockbuster, 70% of their movie rentals are new releases, versus Netflix has 30%. Blockbuster has a local inventory, so let's say you have 100 copies of a new release that you've got a 3-week shelf life on. Netflix has a national inventory, so you can get by with less inventory of movies because you can pool them across the country. And Blockbuster is heavily reliant on late fees. So 10 to 15% of their revenues came from late fees. And of course, Netflix had no late fees. And Blockbuster has to respond by having no late fees too. And you can sort of predict what happens here. And this was a really sad day in the McDonald household. This is the Blockbuster in my hometown in rural Florida, and that was a really sad day when Blockbuster wasn't around anymore. But we can sort of see it coming with these principles of disruptive innovation. So up until this point, we've been thinking about disruptive innovations that come in at the bottom tier of a market. So in the Steel or in the Netflix example, they sort of take hold in this fringe customer area, but that fringe customer is the low end of the market, and they get better and better over time before moving up and attacking incumbents who sort of cede the market to them. But I want to talk about a different type of disruptive innovation, which is new market disruptions. In this case, they take hold in a completely new value network, and we say, this is sort of, academic speak here, they compete against non-consumption, which means that there was nobody who owned the previous version or generation of that product, that perhaps it was not accessible, perhaps it was not affordable, and we say that that competes against non-consumption. So examples are the PC or Sony's pocket transistor radio, which allows a much broader swath of people to own it and to compete against non-consumption. Okay, so I don't know, again, I know a little bit about your business, but you know probably a lot more about your business. And so when you think about your business, are there instances where you see non-consumption in your business? That is, there is an unmet need where, if the product were only more affordable, more accessible, people could have access to it. Any examples like that you can think of, either in your industry or in others? So while you're thinking about that, let me give you a couple of examples that I thought of, not in your industry, and we'll see if that provokes a little bit of thought here. So the video game industry, which I know you're all intimately familiar with. So the video game industry, if you think about how Sony approached this industry, it was, how do we make our products better for our best customers? In this case, the core gamer demographic. So it's the teens, it's the young adults, and what do? You get things like creating ever better graphics, ever more intense gameplay. And you have these teenagers and these young adults with twitchy fingers absolutely love the PlayStation 3. Okay? Now, if you contrast that with how Nintendo approached the market, they said, what about all the people in the world who don't currently consume any video game technology now, either because it's too expensive or it's too complex? They created their Wii product. So simple and so intuitive that even my 3-year-old daughter can play Wii. Now you've entered a new realm of customers here. These are the types of customers that are interested in playing Wii. You have the very old, you have the very young, you have families, but certainly not the core gamer demographic that Sony PlayStation is targeting here. Or think about Minute Clinic, whose nurse practitioner-based kiosks are popping up in retail locations across the country. Now, when you go in, you have a nurse practitioner, and if you have one of 20 common illnesses, something like strep throat or an ear infection, they can diagnose you on the spot, give you a prescription. Their tagline is, "You're sick, we're quick." Right? So now they can't diagnose everything, right? But if you have one of these common 20 illnesses, they can do it quick, they can get you in and out there fast, and you can get your prescription. Disrupting healthcare not by doing it better along traditional lines, but by doing it differently, okay? So think about TurboTax. Again, I'm just thinking about examples that I've used in the last couple of months. TurboTax, whose web-based accounting software is disrupting personal tax preparation services like H&R Block. Now, TurboTax may not be good enough for you. I'm guessing it's probably not good enough for you. And it's certainly not good enough for my rich brother-in-law, who has multiple investment properties that he has to deal with and offshore accounts. But it's good enough for a lowly professor like me that doesn't have a lot of accounting training, that can do my taxes in 2 hours and get my refund, no questions asked. Finally, think about Google Docs, okay? Google Docs, I think, no matter how you slice it, it's not as good as the latest version of Microsoft Word with all its bells and whistles, but it's good enough for many tasks that customers have. It has simple applications for word processing and simple spreadsheets. It's easy to share. It's getting better and better every year, and the price is right. It's free. So now I want to look into the future for a minute, and when you look into the future, it's easy to get sort of really excited about things. And we probably should get excited about these things. Just in the companies that I talked about at the beginning, you have Amazon Air's drones that are going to give you your packages, deliver your packages to you. You have Facebook's Oculus virtual reality headset that's going to give you a better immersive experience with social media. And you've got things like Google Glass and other wearable technologies, right? This is the stuff straight out of science fiction. It's probably the same in your field too. But I want to stay closer to the theory here and suggest that maybe those new technologies, they don't actually change how any of those firms makes money. So Amazon wants to deliver more packages to you faster, right, and get you to buy more. Google wants you to do as many internet searches as possible so they can book more ad revenue. And Facebook wants you to do, well, I don't know, whatever you do on Facebook, they want you to do more of it and more immersively, right? But instead, I want to stick closer to the theory, and I want to think about a couple of industries that people have invariably described as, well, that's great, but it doesn't work in my business. Disruption doesn't happen in my business for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of that. One is financial services. And you could say, hey, we saw the emergence of online brokerages in the mid-90s. We've seen disruption happen. Yes, but if you look at some other swaths of financial services, things like banks, things like venture capital, we haven't seen a lot of changes in the models, and we haven't seen a lot of changes in how these firms have made money over time. Now, we're seeing some interesting things now around payments, lending and investing. We're seeing some new models that are being experimented with. You're seeing things like Bitcoin and virtual currency that feels like things are going to change here a little bit. But I want to draw your attention to a company called Wealthfront, which is a software-based financial advisor that's a new market disruption serving those who can't afford the high minimums of traditional financial advisors. Now, financial advisors can't lower their fees to compete with Wealthfront because that wouldn't be very profitable for them. And in this case, it appeals to a group of fringe customers. These are young technologists and engineers, many of whom have made a little bit of money as their companies have gone public or been acquired. They're very mistrustful of Wall Street, and they're very comfortable having algorithms and software manage their money. Okay? Another example is hospitality. So we saw the emergence of low-cost hotels in sort of the mid-1950s. But if you look at things like Days Inn or Holiday Inn, none of these companies has ever moved up market over time so that they're now competing with the Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton, right? And this is for good reason. If you want to compete with the Ritz-Carltons of the world, then you have to emulate their service, their high level of service. And as you do that, you add additional cost to what you're doing. And so we haven't seen this happen here. But back to the point about Uber here, there's a company called Airbnb that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, right? We have a sharing service that allows people to rent out lodging. It started off offering short-term living quarters for people who couldn't afford a hotel or couldn't book one in a crowded market, such as when there's a conference. And maybe it's even for students that wanted to sublet their expensive apartment to make a little bit of extra money. So you can think about it as starting off in the rebar of humanity of students, right, and moving up market over time. But as they've gotten better and better, they've created new ways to rate. So the folks who are renting out the property and the folks who are staying there, they've got some very sophisticated ways to get the matching right. And as time has gone on, they've gotten better and better. And now they're renting out things like a $4,000 a night beach house in Australia or a $7,000 a night villa in Florence, Italy. So now all of a sudden you can start moving up market and competing a little bit more closely with things like Ritz-Carlton. Okay. So finally, I want to turn the lens. It wouldn't be fair if I didn't turn the lens on my own industry, higher education here. This has been a classic one that people have said, this is never going to change. We have the same elite universities over and over again. And in fact, in 2011, The Economist had an article that said, elite business schools still look like a fair deal. Few expect the luster of an MBA from Harvard, Wharton, or Stanford to fade, but schools with names that send a less sexy signal may be in trouble. I personally have a less optimistic view of this. I mean, this kind of thing is happening as we speak at the Harvard Business School. It's a very expensive place to get educated in management. There is a ton of non-consumption. We only let 900 people in a year. And what's happening is that all these markets that are adjacent to us are absolutely booming. So we've got corporate universities, we've got online training programs, and they're competing against non-consumption. And we, at Harvard, we sort of turn our noses up at it and say, well, yeah, but it's not as good as Harvard. And I think that's the right answer to the wrong question. The question is not whether it's as good as Harvard. The question is whether it's getting better and better and whether we are at risk for disruption. Okay? So I want to end with a couple of other challenges to innovation here. And shift gears a little bit, because it sounds like it's a little bit what you've been talking about the last 2 days in terms of thinking about your customers. And if you take any sort of marketing class, we have these adages about what you should do. You should listen to your customers, right? And even more appropriately, you need to really understand your customers. Understand them at a deep level and understand who they are. So the idea is that if we understand our customer, we can develop better products and we can serve these customers better. But the question is, when is this a bad idea? In other words, when is this misguided, or when can it be completely wrong and fall flat on its face? Okay? And so, I mean, you see me up here. I'm Rory McDonald. I have all these characteristics and attributes. I'm 6'1". I am 225 pounds, unfortunately. I have a wonderful wife. I have 4 young kids, fortunately. And one of those kids needs braces very, very badly, unfortunately. But did all of these, so we know all these characteristics and attributes and all these other things that I have, but did that actually cause me to go out and buy the New York Times this morning? Did knowing these attributes and characteristics actually do that? And what we'd like to propose instead is an alternative idea called jobs to be done. So instead of understanding the customer at a deep level and understanding their demographics and characteristics and attributes, we need to understand the job. What is the job that customers are trying to get done? And so in many industries, again, products and services are built around customer attributes and characteristics. But if you think about what causes us to buy this product, it's the jobs that we have in our life, and we pull in certain products and services to help us get this job done. So when customers have a job to be done, we say that they hire a product to get that job done. And it's how does that help us think about things? Or why can that help us innovate better? So I want to talk about an example that my colleague did, Clayton Christensen, with McDonald's. Okay? So this is a McDonald's milkshake problem. And the problem that they were facing was they wanted to increase the sales of their milkshakes. Okay? So as you can imagine, McDonald's is a very sophisticated marketing machine. Okay? They know everything. They know sophisticated demographic profiles of every type of customer that is likely to buy every single product on their menu. And it turns out that they also have a quintessential customer for every one of these products, and they have one for milkshakes. And it turns out that they're me, and people like me, okay? So these are it turns out I'm the quintessential customer for milkshakes. And what they did is they took a lot of people like me into one of these conference rooms, and they said, here are our new product ideas. Why don't you help us and give us feedback on how to make our milkshakes better? So they asked things like, well, would it make you buy more if they were more chocolatey? Or if we changed the flavor? Or if we changed these other things about the milkshake? And we sort of gave them feedback, and they went back and they changed their milkshakes. And they had absolutely no impact at all on sales. Okay? No impact at all. And so we said, well, hey, maybe we should try this other approach. Instead of demographic profiles and the quintessential customer, what is it that the job that the customer is trying to do here when they hire a milkshake from McDonald's? What causes them to hire this milkshake? Okay? What's the job here? And so, did it sort of the old-fashioned way and put a researcher 18 hours a day in a McDonald's? And their job was just to record absolutely everything about these customers that bought milkshakes. Okay, so questions like, what time did they buy the milkshake? What was he wearing? Did he buy other food with it or just the milkshake? And I say he is because it's largely men that are doing this here. Was he alone or with other people? And did he eat it in the restaurant or get in the car and leave? And so the findings were kind of rather intriguing here. The first was that half were sold before 8:30 in the morning. Okay, that was sort of surprising here. The customer was almost always alone. That was the only thing that they bought, and they always got in the car and drove off afterwards. And so that's sort of curious here. What job are they doing here? And so, the next day, the researcher went out and confronted people. They accosted people who walked out with their milkshake and said, hey, what job are you trying to get done when you hired that milkshake? And the people sort of freaked out and said, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about, jobs to be done? And they said, well, let me clarify things. Think about the last time you were in the same situation and you needed to get the same job done, but you didn't hire a milkshake. You hired something else. And it turns out that almost all of these people had the same job here, and that was that they faced a long, boring commute, and that they had, one hand that they had to have on the wheel, and one hand that was free. And they weren't hungry now, but they knew they were going to be hungry by about 10 o'clock, and so the milkshake was sort of perfect for that. Okay? Now, you ask them, what else did they hire? Well, one person says, hey, a couple weeks back, I hired a banana. And the banana, wasn't that good. The problem was that I ate it too fast, and I was hungry by like 7:30. So that didn't work out too well for me. Other ones said, sometimes I hire donuts. And donuts are tasty, but they also have some characteristics that I don't like too much, which is that they get crumbs all over me, and they're gone too quickly, and they give me a sugar spike, right? Not that the milkshakes don't, but this is really bad. The others said, sometimes I hire a bagel when I'm doing that morning commute. But bagels are dry, they're tasteless, and the only way to make them any good is to slather cream cheese all over it. And now you're trying to drive the car, you're slathering cream cheese, you get a call on the cell phone, and this is a total disaster. So I don't hire bagels that much anymore. And sometimes, just very occasionally I hired a Snickers bar, but I felt so guilty after I did it that I didn't hire the Snickers bar anymore, okay? So now we think about the milkshake, it seems pretty good, right? It's pretty good at doing the job that these customers who are coming in to get the milkshake have to do in the morning, which is they need something during a long, boring commute. The milkshake is viscous, so it takes me 20 to 25 minutes to suck it down through the thin little straw. It is also staves off hunger. It sort of sits in my stomach, right? It's convenient. I can hold it with one hand or put it in the cup holder. And this is really doing the job well for me, especially relative to these alternatives. Okay, so what are the implications here from this? One, I think, is about competition, right? How do we think about who our competitors really are, what they're doing for us? And the other is about product improvement. And the suggestion here is that the competitors aren't other fast food chains that are serving milkshakes. They include and encompass all the other things, the other products and services that a customer could hire to do the same job, okay? The second is, and as a result, the market is sort of a lot bigger, perhaps a lot bigger than we actually think it is. The second is that you have to improve the product along dimensions of performance that actually matter for the job the customer is trying to get done. So McDonald's improved milkshakes in a whole bunch of different ways, but they were actually unrelated to the job that customers had to get done. And so now the question is, how do you really, given that your product is doing well at the job, how do you really nail the job? How do you make it better along those dimensions? Now you can imagine things like, well, you can make it more viscous, right? So it takes even longer to suck down during that commute. You can add, things like chunks of fruit into the milkshake, not to be healthy because that's not the job that they're hiring the milkshake for, right? But rather just to give you a little bit of unexpected pleasure and delight during your boring commute. And finally, you can take the dispensing machine, move it from behind the counter to in front of the counter. You can give people a prepaid swipe card so they can run in, grab their milkshake, and go and be on their road and doing their job as well as possible. That would be really nailing the job. Okay? So I want to leave you with two parting thoughts, one trivial and one hopefully a little bit more interesting. The first is that innovation is hard. You guys, this is an unbelievable group that I'm getting to talk to in terms of how innovative you guys are and all the new things that you're doing, and you know how hard it is. And there's different things that are hard about different industries. But the other that I'd like to propose is that avoiding some of the common pitfalls or traps when you're trying to innovate can be made a little bit easier. Particularly if we harness some of these ideas around disruptive innovation, around jobs to be done, they can sort of allow us to avoid some of these pitfalls and perhaps even innovate more effectively.